Hey, I'm Hunt, and this is Hunt on LSU, your channel for LSU Fighting Tiger football talk. Enjoy the video. We want you to leave a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe right below the video. Enjoy. Yesterday, we gave you some of the sound from Brian Kelly as he addressed the media for the first time during spring football. We talked about some of the changes on the defense, Harold Perkins, some of the staff members as well, talked about the progression of Shelton Sampson. But Brian Kelly had some other things to say to the media. And one of these topics is not earth-shattering. It is very much an obvious talking point of this spring and will be a talking point as we move through August to the opener in Las Vegas against USC. But nonetheless, I like to hear it from the horse's mouth, to use a cliche. I like to hear it from Brian Kelly as opposed to us just sitting here and ballyhooing about. So let's hear Brian Kelly talking about replacing Jayden Daniels specifically as a runner.
You can do it with, perimeter throws that Jayden gave us with perimeter runs. And you can do it not simply with the running backs, but how you use your offensive line. We think that we've got, if not one of the best, certainly one of the top offensive lines in the country. And they're athletic as well. We think our tackles can move and pull. So I think a run game that now becomes a lot more diversified in the sense that we can start moving and pulling our offensive linemen to create an offensive running game that strikes on a much wider front. I think certainly the running backs will play a part in this, but I think the focus needs to be much more on how the offensive line will play a much larger role in what we do to enhance our running game.
That is absolutely the way that I see it as well. It's incumbent upon the LSU offensive line to change the way that LSU runs the football. Now, Jayden Daniels ran for over 1,000 yards last year, and there was some of it that was designed. I would suggest, without doing the research, I'm sure someone has, that most of that was off script. Play breaks down, pass rush gets to him, just extending plays and making things happen. Now, sometimes they did a design run and he got it upfield, and there was a degree of that in the offense that I don't believe will be in the offense very much this year. Some, but not very much. And there's certainly a degree of read option where you might have a quarterback run, you might have a give, and I think that will be in there still a little bit, maybe not as much. It'll just be a traditional give there. But the offensive line's got to play better and play differently. You don't want to be too committed to anything with the offensive line with the understanding of how much improvisation Jayden Daniels can do. It behooves you to just set things up front, run your play, and if things break down, then just let Jayden use the whole field. Don't make him go one way or another. Let him have all 53 yards wide and make them defend it. You don't really have that with Garrett. So you're going to have to block it and make sure everybody's on the same page and go in the right direction. So I think that's obviously what you're going to see. If you look at Garrett Nussmeier's career rushing statistics, and obviously he hasn't played a ton, 18 games, he's run the ball 7 times, and if you use sack yardage, negative 58 yards. So it's not as if he's never had a run over a yard. Like it's not, he just doesn't run. So I think he's pretty athletic, and he will run more than he did previously. Keep in mind, you come into the game against Georgia in the SEC championship game, you're down 1 million, you got to throw. Running does you no good. You come into the game in Tuscaloosa last year after Jayden goes out, you're down 2 scores, you got to throw. So he's come into some games where running the football was not an option. So these stats are skewed a little bit, but he hasn't run very much. I think he's a Matt Flynn type athlete, not quite as good an athlete as Joe Burrow. So a good athlete that can get you 7 or 8 if something breaks down, but that's not going to be in the playbook a ton. It's going to have to be the offensive line and the running backs picking up the slack. And the person who's in charge of getting all this figured out is, of course, Joe Sloan, who was elevated from the quarterback's coach to the offensive coordinator, depending on what you want to tag Cortez Hankton with. And Brian Kelly spoke to why he chose Joe Sloan as offensive coordinator. We're going to wait for a second for that one. We'll get to it in a second. But I think, and we'll hear from Brian Kelly, but I think one of the things that we've already heard from Garrett Nussmeier this spring is just how comfortable he is with Joe Sloan. And while there has been shakeup at coordinator on both sides of the football, this one is not as drastic. This is a guy who's been working with Garrett Nussmeier for 2 years now, so there's going to be a lot of familiarity. And here's Brian Kelly talking about Joe Sloan.
He's been on a job interview for a couple of years. I've gotten a chance to work with him. I've been in the quarterback meeting room. That's where I sit when I get a chance to be involved. So I've been around him, and I know what that position requires to be the offensive coordinator. And so I just felt like he had the leadership capabilities, the intellect, the understanding of what I was looking for in terms of our offensive identity and philosophy, and felt like it was his time.
So if you hear that, one of the most important pieces of that bite is Brian Kelly telling you where he sits when he's got some time. If you've been listening, you heard Chip Kelly say that it was just too much being the head coach. He wants to co-coach football, because a lot of times as the head coach, you're not coaching football. You heard Nick Saban say that he's not coaching a lot of football. He's having to do a lot of different things and manage a lot of different personalities and situations that arise in the football program. You heard, I can't recall his name, but the head coach from Boston College, who's now up calling plays for Green Bay, said, I don't coach any football. So, the head coach has got a lot on his plate and he's doing a lot of different things. There's not a lot of time for meetings. But when Brian Kelly can sit in meetings, he's not sitting with Frank Wilson and the running backs. He's not sitting there with the DBs. He's not working with the special teams. He sits in the quarterback room. That's where he feels his input is most important. And obviously that's a huge cog in the machine that is a football team, how well your quarterback is coached up and how well they're performing. But the part that he keeps adding on to there is he says, I've heard Joe Sloan do this. He's already been on a job interview. So I do think that likely Brian Kelly has the best feel of all the departments that are in his Fortune 500 company that is this LSU football program, from recruiting to special teams to offensive line to the transfer portal to quarterbacks to the defensive coordinator. To all these departments he's got to oversee. The one he probably has the best feel for is the quarterback room and offensive game planning. And so for that reason, I feel really good about the decision to elevate Joe Sloan and Cortez Hankton to keep doing this. It feels like Brian Kelly's got the best feel for what they've been coaching, what the terminology looks like, what the relationships are look like, and where this thing is headed. Clearly, LSU had one of the best offenses we've ever seen last year. They had the best offense in college football. That's not really the bar to me. That would be great if they did that again, but that's not really the bar. I just want them to be really good. And it feels like they've given themselves the best opportunity to be that, and he thinks that the guys that are there, although they weren't central casting last year, that would have been Jayden Daniels and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and Mike Denbrock, they were supporting cast. They're now ready for the bright lights. I feel pretty good about that because, again, there's just so much that Brian Kelly has to deal with, but this has been where he's been the most closely involved. So we're not going to learn every single nuance to this running game in the spring. That's not what it's for from our perspective as talking heads. They're installing over there. We're not going to see a lot of it. They're getting their feet wet. They're understanding how this thing's got to change, even though a lot of the guys are back from last year. And we're not going to go out there in Tiger Stadium for the spring football game and go, oh, look, see that? Oh, that's a change. Wow. That's okay. That's new. You're not going to see that. You will see that in Vegas. And I think everyone's aware of that. I don't think anybody expects to start looking at LSU football in the spring, reading your practice report wherever you do that, or listening to us talk, or going to Twitter, or seeing the videos and all that kind of stuff, and feel like you understand that times they are a-changing. But we all knew entering the spring as talking heads, like times do have to change, and that's the chorus they're singing over there as well. I'm curious to hear some of what Garrett Nussmeier has to say. I'm curious to hear some of what Will Campbell has to say. I'm curious to see if we get a chance to talk to Joe Sloan later on in the spring. There's some player availability. There's some coach availability, not quite as much as the ramp up in fall camp, but this is just a little bit more laid back time of year. We know that. So I'm curious to hear about it, while I understand that I'm probably not going to see very much of it, if any, until we get to LA. But I will say this in summation of our talk about the running game, like, I feel okay about it. the offensive line's got to get better at run blocking against elite opponents, but there's every reason to believe that Will Campbell and Garrett Dellinger and DJ Chester and Emory Jones, and who am I missing on the right side? Transfer Miles Frazier. It was coming. Miles Frazier, and then Caleb Jackson and Josh Williams and Caden Durham can handle this. They can be a potent rushing attack. It looks different than 2023, but I think they can handle this, and they're taking their first strides here on this during this spring football period. Hey, thanks for watching Hunt on LSU. Before you get out of here, do us a couple of favors. Hit that like button, leave your comments below, and subscribe to the channel for all your Fighting Tiger football talk. See you next time.